I'm going to ask about it.
Yes, because people just are not moving around. 24/7 down the street from you, they haven't moved since they moved in. I sent it today, or today. Where I used to live. Place in Florida. He said,
Yeah.
they got
Now, let's call this meeting to order. Notice of an open work session of the City Council of North Kansas City, Missouri, September 4th, 2018. Mr. Eric.
Thanks, sir. At your last council meeting, somehow the what we're calling shared active transportation came up, which you're starting to see around the Kansas City area in terms of scooters and what we expect to see more of in the future in terms of motorized vehicles came up, and we mentioned that we were planning on bringing an agreement forward for your consideration to guide their use here in North Kansas City based upon one that's in place in Kansas City. And Councilmember Pearman said that she had some questions about that, and so we had an open work session date and decided that would be a good topic for tonight's work session. So we prepared some information. I'll turn it over to Community Development Director Sarah Copeland to continue.
And I'll just start by saying I'm happy for you to interrupt me at any time to ask whatever questions are of most interest to you all tonight as we talked about shared active transportation. Bird is the scooter company that launched in KCMO in mid-July, and I'm pretty sure the day they launched, or at the latest the second day they were here, we had scooters in North Kansas City. And so periodically over the past almost 2 months, when I'm sitting at my desk, I will open up the app on my phone just to see, are there any birds here in North Kansas City? And I frequently see at least one. I think the most I've seen in North Kansas City at one time is 6. And I'm just, checking what I think of it. So we know that they're here. We know that people are interested in them, that they're having fun riding them around. And it's staff's perspective on this that for Bird or Lime or any of these other scooter companies or dockless bike share companies to operate here legally, they need to have a business license and they need to enter into an operating agreement with the city. And that's because they are doing business in the right-of-way. People are rent these where they are found, which is mostly in the right-of-way. And so that's what people need to do if they're going to do business in the right-of-way. So we have spoken with Bird, we've spoken with Lime, we've also spoken with Bike Walk KC. They operate the B-Cycle stations here, and they're looking at doing their own dockless hybrid rollout some point later this year. And kind of made this position clear to them, and we've been working on a draft operating agreement to share with them to enter into with the city. And I will say the draft that was attached to the staff report for tonight is still a draft. We have provided it to them but not gotten any feedback from them about it yet, so they may have some comments after they see it. But we're basing this on the way that Kansas City is working with them, and so that it's somewhat consistent, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And we're really thinking about how can these companies best operate in the right-of-way in a way that makes sense for everybody. And I also should say that Jeremy LaFavor, who works for Bird, is here tonight. So if you have detailed scooter questions about how this works, I'm sure he would be happy to help answer those as well. But we have some of the main things that we've been thinking about from a staff perspective is, how do we make sure that this is safe for all involved? When we adopted the bicycle code amendments in July, that was right after they'd launched. And so we may find as we get into this that there are things that you would like to adjust about those code amendments. We're also thinking we might learn some things from Kansas City. They have 350 scooters deployed there now. That number might go up here in the near future. So we might learn from them as they continue working with scooter companies and with even more scooters down there. Say in the last couple of months, I don't think there have been many major safety problems, or at least none that we've heard about. They are launching a work group and intend to invite us and KCK in Overland Park to work with them on, best practices and things that we can do to be consistent, and also to learn, what are the best things that we can do to make sure that this all happens safely. We did include in the amendments that you adopted in July definitions for foot scooter and motorized scooter, but that was really all we did to address scooters. Those were primarily amendments focused on bikes. So we may find that there are things that you would want to amend as we get more scooters scooting around North Kansas City. And we don't necessarily know what those changes might be. And one of the things we've discussed is clarifying whether or not you can ride them on the sidewalk. I think Chief Beamer's perspective is they're motorized vehicles and they should be on the street. I think the amendment or the ordinance is a little bit unclear about that. And it's just because we weren't thinking about scooters on the sidewalk when we drafted those. That's something we could go back at any point that you directed us to and clarify that. One big question that I've heard from people is, what if these are left abandoned in the middle of the sidewalk and block people's way? The draft operating agreement that we distributed here outlines requirements for companies to respond to problems or complaints. Section 10 outlines that they need to be able to respond within 2 hours to address that. I think Kansas City's perspective in just a couple of months is they really haven't had a whole lot of those. They're also small enough that if you were an able-bodied person and came across one of these, they're pretty easy to move out of your way. Really, our next step is to provide this draft operating agreement to these companies and ask them to execute this with us. Bird has already submitted a business license application. We haven't taken any action on it yet because an operating agreement would be required. But that's kind of the brief overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Talk about anything else that's of interest.
I think you know how I would feel about the sidewalks. I don't like bicycles on the sidewalks. And I think this would be borders on ridiculous on the sidewalks. I have no problems with them in the street, where they belong, I feel. Motorized vehicles. I mean, pretty soon we're not going to be able to let people walk down the sidewalks.
Would you like us to go ahead and bring forward an ordinance here in the near future to clarify our current regulation regarding motorized vehicles? Because obviously, as a Chief Beamer, you do feel that way as well. So.
The ordinance does specifically say motorized bicycles are prohibited on sidewalks. It would be a pretty short and easy amendment to add motorized scooters to that section. And we could bring that before you at the next meeting if you're interested in that.
I'd just like to hear what the chief has to say about the whole situation. Put you on the spot.
The whole situation as in these scooters coming to North Kansas City, or?
Yeah, how they would be handled, what you think the overall picture would be about their safety and how they would be used and how the officers would respond, and whatever you can say succinctly about it. I mean, I don't want you to spend the whole meeting with it.
They're coming. They're here.
Yeah.
So to try and keep them out of North Kansas City isn't going to happen.
No.
I think that regulating them through an operating agreement with the various companies that provide these devices is wise, so that we do have some type of document in place to help hold people accountable as far as getting them collected up if there's a problem, making sure that these things don't just sit around, for lack of a better term. As far as how they're operated, I think they need to be on the streets. I don't think they need to be on the sidewalks. You have to be at least 18 years of age to rent one. Now, that doesn't, I've already seen people less than 18 years of age on them, but that's the nature of the beast, so to speak, when you have devices that you can rent off of your cell phone and you click, yes, I agree, and then away you go. If they're not being operated in a prudent manner, we'll address it if we see it. But the main thing for me is I don't think we need to allow them on our sidewalks, and they're going to be out here on the streets. Hopefully the people operating them use good judgment and follow all the traffic laws. If they don't, we'll deal with it. That's my 2 cents, I guess, on this.
Thank you, sir.
Quick question, Stephen, I don't know if you know the answer to this. So I go rent one. Where does the proof of insurance come in, registration come in if I get pulled over? Do you even have an answer to that? I don't know. Because you're supposed to have insurance with you at all times. Is it my insurance that takes care of it?
Well, there is no licensing requirement for these. In other words,
But if I run into somebody, there better be some insurance involved.
I have not looked. I don't know when you. Bird may address that there's some type of indemnification that before you can get the app and everything, before you can rent one. I don't know what requirements they may have from their perspective if the gentleman from Bird wants to address that. But
You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, but I think it's, you know, the operator of that particular vehicle, if he creates an accident and he has liability, it's on him.
Go ahead, sir.
Hi, council members. Jeremy LaFaver representing Bird Rides here today. It's a great question. Those tend to be on personal homeowners insurance policies because it's not a.
So they're aware of this when they sign up for it, that
It's
they
on
are
the-
responsible for this piece of equipment and all liabilities that go with it.
It's in the user agreement that they have to agree to on the app, and then you have to take a picture of your driver's license, and so it's assumed that everybody with a driver's license understands the rules of the road, and then the driver's license is supposed to be that proof of 18 years old, but there is no requirement on our end for somebody to have personal liability insurance when they're on it.
It'd be interesting for you guys.
The world continues to change.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, the way I'm understanding this is the direction we're looking at is to have these scooters on the street and not on the sidewalk. Is that right? And how do we know? Is there a regulation? They're supposed to be 18, but how do you know that they're not 13 and 14-year-old kids out there who don't even understand insurance and going to be riding those around? I remember, it's been 20 years maybe ago, up in Iowa, they were riding these mopeds, and they had 14-year-old kids out there riding them. It was dangerous as heck. I saw a kid almost get hit on one. And I just don't want to see underage people doing it. And the explanation on homeowners insurance is pretty weak, in my opinion.
I had a question. Will this put more of a burden on the officers when they look at a guy and try to ascertain his age? Are you going to have to stop more? Let's say we have a plethora of 20 or 30 bikes or scooters going around. Well, the officers are going to have to be more aware of the looks of that rider. You know what I'm saying? It's going to put.
I don't think that we're not going to stop people on a scooter to ascertain their age. I mean, if they're following. Now, if you've got someone who looks like they are way underage, that may be a different situation. But that's a Bird responsibility that they've got to be 18 years of age to operate the vehicle. There's nothing in our city ordinances that requires a certain age to operate a Bird scooter. So there's nothing that's there. Now, if the person operating the vehicle, no matter what age they are, is doing something that violates the rules of the road, we'll have a conversation with them about that. But to just stop them because they look to be underage, there is no city ordinance that requires them to be of a certain age to operate one of these. That's a Bird requirement.
I would just note that in the draft agreement that you have, we do have sections regarding indemnification and insurance, sections 12, 13, 14. 15 is a section regarding controlling law, so that tries to cover the city in terms of their operation in town.
In terms of riding on the road or sidewalk, though, wouldn't it also be more dangerous in the areas of the city where the speed is higher and these things max out at 15 miles an hour and you're on a 35-mile-an-hour stretch? I mean, would it not seem safer to have them riding the sidewalk in those areas, but limit it maybe in the central business district?
Okay, I'm at the city market. I rent one of these things to come over here to go to the Cinder Block or some other chicken and pickle. I have no idea what the rules of the road are regarding whether I can be on the sidewalk here or here. I think we make a blanket. The only way to do it, and to your point, how safe is that scooter on a 40-mile-an-hour roadway? Some of this goes back to the person that got that scooter to use good judgment and good sense as to where they operated. So the operator bears a lot of the responsibilities to where they put that scooter. But I'm not comfortable trying to delineate certain parts of the city where you have to be on the roadway here, you have to be on the sidewalk here. It's just not, it'd be very cumbersome law to know and to enforce. I think we put it back on the operator of the scooter to use good judgment and common sense as to where they ride that.
Does Byrd have a recommendation of where these scooters are to be ridden? Because really, if you look at sidewalks, bike lanes, or roads, I'm not sure there's any good option there.
Yeah, it's our recommendation, and it says on every scooter and in every app, and it's part of our social media campaign to not ride on sidewalks. We recommend that they're ridden like bicycles in bike lanes where available. When bike lanes are not available, they're ridden to the far right side of the road. To the chief's point, I think it is kind of user-based, and many people, most people, I think there are some people that will try to ride one on a 40-mile-an-hour road, but probably not for very long. Just like riding a bicycle, they hop off pretty quickly. There are areas of town where I live out south in Waldo, where up and down Warnell Road is just, I mean, that's impossible to ride a scooter there, but nobody walks on the sidewalks either. Occasionally you'll see somebody passing by, but there's enough room you can kind of either get off or scoot off, but that's how bicycles operate there. But from Byrd's recommendation, it's in our app, and it's in our user agreement, and it's in our advertisements that we prefer, and we ask people not to ride on the sidewalk.
As a point along that line, are you paying for the use of that when it's not in motion? You're paying the 15 cents per minute when if it's just sitting there while you're deciding where you want to go again. Is that correct? The reason I ask that is because they probably wouldn't want to ride it on the sidewalk if they were going to try to go into a store and do something. You'd have less of a sidewalk type rider. They wouldn't want to go to Chicken and Pickle and spend an hour in there eating a lunch.
Well, what they would do is they would lock the scooter, and so they would no longer be paying for it, and it would be outside of Chicken and Pickle. And then somebody could come out of Chicken and Pickle and say, hey, I want to head to the city market, and they'd scoot that way. The idea is that there are enough scooters in the density areas to where it's not, at the beginning of the day, you get it and it's yours all day long. You get it, you scoot to where you need to go, and then somebody else gets it and goes. The idea, and we don't build out our capacity until we're getting 3 rides per scooter per day. And so those scooters, in order for us to keep them out on the machine per our own policy, but certainly per Casey Mo's agreement, they're getting at least 3 rides per scooter per day.
So there's no incentive not to be on the sidewalk. That was what I was thinking of. If they're not going to spend a lot of time. When they come out of Chicken and Pickle and the bike's gone, then what do they do then if they want to go someplace? I'm not quite sure how
They walk, or they look at their app and see, if there's an agreement in North Kansas City, we would have more than the 5 or 6 that are occasionally here now. There would be what we call nests, which are actual locations where our chargers place them in the morning, and there would be enough in North Kansas City to support you come out of somewhere and then you look up and it's maybe within a block or 2 from you, and you walk to that and then get to where you need to go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the app. I know you're supposed to be 18 and I guess you take a picture of the driver's license.
That's correct.
Does the app recognize when they take the picture of the driver's license that that person's 18 or not?
That tends, the technology to do that is not available in our app yet, but our developers are working on it. What we do right now is there's a manual random check that we do at headquarters, but then it's also possible, and we work with police departments around the country in KCMO. We haven't had any reported yet, but when they stop somebody, if the police see somebody that's clear, I mean, that's clearly what's going on here, and there's a number on the top of every bird, and they say at this time this person was riding not in accordance with our laws, and certainly not in accordance with your user agreement, we can suspend that user's app to where they are no longer allowed to rent scooters. And we haven't had that problem in Kansas City. There have been other places, mostly further out west, where adults were doing that for younger kids, and they were suspended. Just like any other sort of age-restricted item, adults sometimes purchase them for minors. We have an ability to end that as soon as they are reported, and they can't, it's through email, they can't get a new account.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Have you any data supporting any accidents, either fatal or non-fatal, that your product has had?
I'm not aware of any fatal accidents that our product has had. There's a story, a recent story, famous in, I believe it was Cleveland, where a woman was on a motorized scooter. It was not a bird scooter, and she was hit by a drunk driver and killed. But I have not heard of any deaths in Kansas City. The police, we communicate with them weekly. We have not heard of any major issues from them. We have heard of people, when they try to get up on the sidewalk and they're going too fast, because really, once you get on one and you're on the sidewalk, it doesn't feel safe. It feels safer in the street where you're going solid. And when people try to get on the sidewalk, sometimes accidents happen. The good news is they're only going 15 miles an hour and they get some road rash. I fell and I scraped up my elbow and my knee. So,
Thank you.
but I'm okay.
I have several questions. On these scooters, how far can they go? What's the distance of these scooters?
Kind of depends on the rider. They go a little bit less long when I'm on top of them than when they do when other people are on top of them, but about 15, 20 miles, and of course, depending on the ups and downs.
And then it's charged, so it runs out of charge?
We haven't had too many that have completely run out of a charge in a day. Every night, every scooter is picked up off every street. Now, there are times when maybe a charger can't find one or it was off the beaten path, and I can explain that charger thing to you, but I want to answer this question first. And so they could run out of battery, but usually they don't during the day. But they go about 20 miles.
Okay, so are there any GPS boundaries that are set as far as how far you can take the scooter? Can you put a scooter in your car, drive it off? I'm just asking general questions, so
no,
I just wanna know.
people have taken the scooter and driven off, and they're able to ride them, but they're GPS located, and we know where it is, and we will likely, the way the charger program works is we assign a value at 9 o'clock at night to every scooter between $5 and $20. The $5 ones are all centrally located and pretty easy to scoop up and throw, 10 in a van really quick. The $20 ones are ones that are way out somewhere, and so we provide that incentive for somebody to go out and find it and get it. And the chargers tend to be enthusiastic about that, and we recruit them in all parts of the city. It's kind of like a real live Pokemon Go. You got to catch them all.
Okay. If, and I'm not saying we would, but let's say a city doesn't want these scooters to operate in their right-of-way. And is there a way to prevent those scooters from entering into our right-of-way?
I don't know that there's a way to prevent use of the public right-of-way in a lawful way. I think there's a way to not allow a company to have a business license, maybe.
Our concern with right-of-way use has to do with having nests and things, having parking them.
Yeah.
But yeah, to answer his question, I don't know, Chief has a different opinion, but I think, we allow people to use our right-of-way every day without charging them. That's part of what taxes are for. What the business license and the agreement would pertain to would be storage of the bicycles in particular locations in the right-of-way.
And the chief asked, the chief said this before with regards to, they're not going away, we're gonna have scooters, and we do. I was on vacation, first day you guys entered into Kansas City's agreement, I heard about it off in another country. So I know that they're not going anywhere. I guess my question is, it either is, as the chief indicates, we have to police it, monitor it, whatever, or we sign into an operating agreement. Well, those are two very different decisions, the one we don't have a choice in, right? If you don't prevent the scooters from coming into the city, then they're going to be here, and they're here today. The second, we have a choice, whether we enter into an operating agreement, which says that the city is saying you are allowed to do business here, you are allowed to be in our city, and that's a whole different conversation in my mind in terms of liability and other aspects that are a little broader maybe than just policing them. Not that I don't have concerns about the policing part of it. So my questions related to policing are these ticketed like cars? And what if you have drunk driving, those sorts of issues? How is that handled?
I think that depends on the local municipal code. I know most municipalities, I think yours includes bicycles bicycles and motorized scooters. And so my guess, Chief will probably better answer that question, but my guess is if you can get a DUI on a bicycle, you can get a DUI on an electric scooter, and we would be supportive of that. We have worked with police departments throughout the country on ticketing events or patrols, I guess, where there are helmet laws in some other places that we don't have here. And so we're totally supportive of enforcement and working with the police department to make sure that users are being within the law. But I think the chief was going to comment on that too.
Regarding DUI, under the definition of a motor vehicle in the code currently, these would qualify. It is something that is not self-propelled, so it has a motor and it has wheels and it's on the roadway. So it would qualify as a motor vehicle. As such, DUI could be an enforceable violation if someone was operating these intoxicated. Some of the other laws, more than likely, most of them would be applicable as well. I can't speak to the broad base as far as the general rules of the road would be applicable as a motor vehicle would be. As far as ticketing, we can issue a ticket to someone that does not have a driver's license if we had to. Juveniles, if they are less than 15 and a half, the violation is sent to the juvenile court. Quite frankly, that's usually more cumbersome than it's worth to try to address those types of violations for a traffic violation. But I think that, broadly speaking, motor vehicles would fall under the definition of a motor vehicle. As such, penalties could apply as they would as if you were driving a car. Motorcycle, motorized bicycle, anything like that.
Okay. Some of our roads are MoDOT roads. So do you have to have an operating agreement with Missouri Department of Transportation as well, or do we cover those roads in our operating agreement? Or like Burlington, I could see as would be a very common, especially after we get bike lanes, a very common path for the scooters.
I think for something like this, it would be the city limits. It wouldn't matter whether it was state right-of-way or local right-of-way.
So we would be able to authorize, I guess, or
yes.
Okay.
By the way, in answer to your question, theoretically, you could outlaw these. We don't recommend it, but there are some cities, as you may have heard, that have, in part because they didn't feel ready when they first came because they just sort of popped up. We don't recommend that, but I mean, theoretically, you could, and you, by means of that, direct us to confiscate them or something if we saw them. Yeah.
Well, I'm not trying to be an extremist,
Right.
but I am pretty open to, I'm very much a believer in complete streets and alternative, tools and operating different kinds of vehicles. So in that sense, I like the scooters. I do have concerns from a liability perspective for me mostly. So I won't ask it now, but I will have some questions about liability.
Mr. Mayor, if I might
Yeah, go ahead.
make a point real quick on the complete streets point, and you brought that up. The other thing that, and I didn't see it in this agreement, but we do it in every city where we are. It's part of our Save Our Sidewalks pledge, and that Bird, once we enter into an agreement, pays $1 per scooter per day to the governing entity for the scooters that are in their locality to help pay for transit, bike walk infrastructure. In Kansas, with 300 scooters a day, that's what the cap is here, and I have some thoughts about the cap as well. But if we're at 300, that's about $9,000 a month that would come to North Kansas City to help fund infrastructure.
Let me talk once. Let me talk once. We're spending a heck of a lot of money building bike paths. If you go down here and look at our brand-new road, we got a bike path on both sides of that road. My understanding is that we're working on it, bringing them down Armour Road. We're also working on bringing them down Burlington. If we're not willing to go ahead with this, what's the point in trying to make a bicycle and pedestrian community? I mean, it's like the chief said, this is coming, and so we might as well just gear up and go with it. And that's my 2 cents. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think anybody up here is necessarily against it. I think we're inquiring as good stewards of the city in its conditions to find out what's involved in getting the thing taken care of. My question that I was going to ask was, I know the plaza originally banned them, and then they changed their mind. Are you able to speak to that issue about what their problem was or why they changed their mind to allow it?
Not certain I can completely speak to the problem of the folks at the plaza. But, having represented them in the legislature, I got to talk with them a lot. The plaza situation, that was something that Bird did voluntarily as a way to sort of extend an olive branch and an act of goodwill to the plaza. They said they have concerns about the pedestrian traffic, and they had mentioned a number of business complaints and customer complaints, and so we took that very seriously and immediately put on our map a red zone and said, please, it wasn't, but it wasn't necessarily a ban from us. It just said, please don't ride here per the Country Club Plaza. We then engaged with the management of Country Club Plaza, and it ended up being a really good conversation, a really good meeting. And we talked about how Bird is able to offer safety ambassadors on the plaza at their request, where we will bring people to the plaza. And as people are riding on the sidewalk, we'll stop them and say, hey, that's awesome that you're having fun on a Bird. We need to ride these in the street here. Here's a free helmet for you, and here's a code for $5 worth of free birds. Enjoy the ride, have fun. And we've done that in a lot of other cities, and people seem to find that good. And then we also offered to bring in some media and do something around that so that people would, the word would get out more and more that, Bird is really encouraging people to ride on the sidewalks. So based on those conversations, we informed the plaza that as soon as they are ready to do the ambassador program or an event, that we're ready to do that, but we let them know that we were going to lift that courtesy red zone in a week, and we pulled that red zone, and so far we haven't had, I haven't heard of any complaints from either the police department, the plaza, or from Bird Corporate.
Thank you for that information.
You bet. Thank you.
I heard there's an operating time. Are you guys open from like 8 to 5?
That's right. It's not so much an opening time because the birds start getting put out between 4 a.m. and roughly 7 a.m.
So they have headlights and taillights on them?
They do, yes. They're not really meant to be ridden in the dark, but they do have a headlight and a taillight on it, and a brake light on it as well. The idea is to ride it in the daytime. They turn off at 9 o'clock, and so
no matter where you're at, it's going to shut down.
Well, if you're on it and you're cruising down a road at 15 miles an hour, we're going to let you finish your ride. But
It tells you that you're out of time or whatever.
Well, as soon as you get to your destination and you lock the thing. Now, if you hop on one and want to ride it for 4.5 hours until it dies, starting at 9 o'clock at night, I suppose you could do that. It doesn't seem particularly safe or a wise idea. It would be against the user agreement, but the ride ends at 9. And they're usually picked up by about midnight.
So you have, what did you call them?
Chargers?
No, they go out and pick these things up?
Those are the chargers, yeah.
They like you said, Pokemon, they got to go find them and bring
That's
them
right.
back to what you call the nest to put them on charge.
Well, what they do is they take them back to their homes, and they charge them at their home. It's a charger about the size of a laptop charger, right. And then they put them back in their cars and take them out. And nests are just groupings of 3 birds. We do a lot of bird metaphors. And so our nests are groupings of 3 birds, and they're decided based on use, basically. And there's a lot of algorithms, plus businesses oftentimes come to Bird and say, chicken and pickle, we want a nest here so that people know that they can find them here and use them and get here and back. And so we'll do them there by design. But the nests are decided based on usage. And again, it's kind of like a Pokemon Go in the morning. You wake up and you see, oh, awesome, they've assigned a nest right by my house, so I don't have to drive far. I'm going to claim that nest and go put my birds there real quick. But we can't guarantee that the nests will get filled with birds because, again, it's crowdsourced. And so one of the things, and we can talk about it later now, in the agreement was data sharing on the nest points, and that becomes extremely, extremely difficult. Because we don't always know where they are. They're not in the same place, and to do that daily would be more cumbersome than I think we're able to do, and I think that would be useful. But the other data sharing components in there, we're easily able to share that data with the city.
To go back to your question about the headlights, in Section 4 of the draft operating agreement about the company's obligations, number 3 is about some safety equipment and specifies that the scooters need to have always-on front and tail lights.
And they are constantly running.
I think that's a pretty typical component of shared use scooters.
Couple more. With our bike ordinance updates, we are able to ride these in bike lanes, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you're talking about the Save Your Sidewalk program, which you said wasn't initially in here. But is that in the municipality that starts, or everyone that the birds touch?
Every city where we have an agreement where we place nests.
Okay. And then how many nests do you think North Kansas City could sustain?
You know, it's hard to tell. And I hate to be dodgy on that one. When Bird came into Kansas City, they really didn't think that it was going to be as popular as it is. And so the caps that we've got right now, we're blowing those out of the numbers. We're getting 9 to 10 rides per scooter per day. So we can fill them up. It's going to depend on the use of the citizens in the city, and honestly, I'm not sure I have a way to predict that.
So you no idea of what you would consider starting with?
100.
100 in, starting here at North.
We start, everywhere we start, we recommend at 100. And I think we start that way for a lot of reasons, but I think one of the big ones is, and the reason I think cities should stick to a minimum number, is you want to make sure that you're dealing with an operator that's got the ability to build up enough to where this is a service that's, 1, going to be used and going to be useful, and 2, we're also going to be able to be big enough to go out and pick them all up and get them off the street when you need to, and to be able to provide the guarantee that if there's a problem with a scooter or a nest or a group of them somewhere, that we're able to respond to it in less than 2 hours.
Then one more, kind of related to that. Now it talks about removing from the right-of-way within 2 days of being notified.
That's if they were to end their agreement and no longer provide service here.
Oh, default and termination under Section 7. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And they would be picked up within a day.
Yeah, that's okay.
I just have one thing, and it's a suggestion. I've not been on a Bird. My kids love them. They were on them all the time. It might be a good thing to bring one to one of our council meetings. Seriously.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding you, because, you know, we're asking questions about many of us who have never been on it.
I've already
So-
been scolded by Sarah for not bringing one tonight,
There you
so
go.
I can assure you
I
it was the
we're in
first note
favor
I
of
made
it.
today.
But I think it'd be cool to be able to actually see what it is. It's
I would like
one
to do
thing
that. I was a
be
little nervous about the
favorable.
rain. I didn't want,
Well, yeah, I don't want to ride
I
one.
don't want
in
anybody
rain.
falling.
I was going to ride
So.
one here tonight until the rain. It's like I'm not going to get.
I'd
halfway
like
across
to
Heart
let
of
you,
American Bridge.
I'd like to let you know that the city administrator and the assistant city administrator did some research on Fridays. So. I have the app.
Oh, okay. I got a question. Yes. How do you get a job as a charger?
You go on the app and you apply.
Oh,
I went on the app and I applied, and I am a charger.
how are you?
I've only done it once because it's not my cup of tea to run around at night and pick up dirty chargers for $5, but it is somebody's cup of tea and they really enjoy it.
I
So
think that's a great opportunity for somebody that wants to have a little money in their pocket.
my nephew does it, and so he got a minivan from his mom, and he does 3 to 5 chargers a night.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
it's the new paper route.
You know, one of the things that I do see as positive is that we do have a parking situation where a lot of people can't park right in front of the door of where they're going. So if we had a nest of them someplace at a parking lot away from where they want to go, and then they could ride that over there, and the other people, they could ride back to the parking lot, and I can see something good in that. And
One more, then I'm done. So in terms of the operating agreement, are we open to having an unlimited number of operators?
I think that, this is my opinion, and maybe Eric will scold me for this later, but we're talking about a private company coming in to provide a service. I don't think we as staff would recommend getting in the business of choosing which private company is offering this service.
Okay, thank you.
Tom?
A question for somebody. So we allow these bikes to come in, motorized scooters, and they want to come down to the bakery and have breakfast. Where are they going to park their scooter at? On the sidewalk right in front? Because there's no parking places in the street.
So I think our current ordinance does speak to locations for that.
The bicycle
And that's
rack
also
right there.
in the operating agreement. If you look at, let me find which section it is. There's a section on section 4, number 5, parking regulations, says where, you should be parking these things. They could be parked in a manner so as not to block the pedestrian throughway zone of the sidewalk, but you could park them beside bike racks, along the curb, near transit stops or bike share stations. So we do, lay that out in the operating agreement.
I'd like to hear from the chief, too.
I get where you're coming from on this, but I will say this. The footprint of one of these scooters is smaller than that of a bicycle,
Okay.
and how much space it takes up on the sidewalk. I'd rather see them up on the sidewalk rather than sitting in a parking place eating up a spot that a motor vehicle, a car or truck could be sitting in. And they really don't take up much space. They've got a kickstand on them. The other day, when the research was going on out here in the parking lot, I researched it too, one lap around the parking lot. But they will not be a problem on the sidewalk as long as the operator uses a little common sense and a little courtesy and doesn't set it crossways right in front of the door. Yeah. But they don't weigh anything either. If you needed to move one, it wouldn't take much to move it. But I'd rather see them parked out of the parking lanes, especially in the downtown area.
Would there be a parking between cars sometimes there? There's 2 cars parked there. Would they get between the 2 cars?
I think it might become a speed bump at that point and you get run over or something like that. I think you're better off just putting them up on the sidewalk. Once again, the people operating these are going to make up some of the rules on their own. So I hope that they use good judgment and common sense and place them in a location that's not going to impede someone getting in and out of a parking place with a car and not set it someplace where it's going to be a real challenge to pedestrians. But they're small enough it shouldn't be a problem.
As Sarah indicates, Section 4, subsection 5 goes into a fair amount of detail about where these can and cannot be parked.
I read through the thing, but I forget a lot of it.
You might want to take a look at it before we present it to you for formal approval.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I had no problem when been parked on the sidewalk. Because you park one, I even had the problem with Harley Hog. If you park like in the downtown section, here's a car, here's me, and here's a car, somebody's going to pull in and run over these things. Mm-hmm. You can't see them in time.
Yes.
So I don't care if they pick them up and put them on the sidewalk. I just don't want them ridden on the sidewalk,
Right.
I would also add that when a user ends their ride, they're required to take a photograph of how they park their vehicle. Now, not every park job and photograph is reviewed by a staff person at Bird, but that provides the added incentive for the person to go, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to be a jerk about this. And we're also able to go back if there is, a report out front of a business of a regularly, somebody's doing this, it's, again, Bird, your scooter's in the wrong place. We can go back and find that user, touch base with them, and if they continue to do it, we can end their user agreement.
Just to take one step further, Mr. Mayor, as you mentioned earlier, we're building the city out to make it more bike-friendly. I think once you start seeing more locations around town to park bicycles, I think the birds will migrate, so to speak, towards.
Oh, boy.
Sorry about that, but I think the scooters will migrate towards those bicycle parking areas as well, which will create a safe zone for them and keep them out of people's way. Sorry about that. I didn't even think about it when I said it.
I've seen it. I mean, I've seen a lot more people lately biking and now scootering and stuff. So, you know, I think we should move it forward and be cautious about it and make sure we've got all our ducks in a row. I think we asked some really good questions tonight. All our birds in a row.
We're in agreement to move forward?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I would just like to add, I'd like to have a conversation with the city councilor just about liability and insurance and how all that works. So that's my main concern.
Sure.
I'm not anti-scooter. I don't want the city named in a lawsuit in the
Right.
future, and I want to understand how we can be
By all
impacted
means,
by
I
that.
will alert him to your, I already made a note to alert him.
Thank you.
Just say there are fairly extensive clauses in here. It is still under review both by the company
Yeah.
and by the city councilor, so he'll look at it closely. I'll make
And I
sure
read
he
all
does.
those, and
Yeah.
I was, you know, and I was happy with some of the limitations, you know, that were put in there, but I just have
You have any
more
specific
questions beyond
concerns,
that.
please let us know.
Yeah, I would like to know kind of if there are current pending lawsuits, you know, that are name cities as a defendant and against Bird or any other companies, whoever, and what the history been. It's pretty new technology, and so the laws sometimes don't catch up to the new technology, and I'd just like to make sure the city is protected.
Where is their headquarters, the world headquarters for Bird?
Just outside of Los Angeles in Venice, California.
Thank you.
The company's about 10 months old. So 10 months ago, it was one guy in a scooter. And now we are in 50 cities in 3 countries. We did 5 million rides last month. And in Kansas City, Missouri, we did about 80,000 miles worth of travel.
Thank you.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.